Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivardhari. Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivardhari. Yasodanandana Brajajana Ranjana. Yasodanandana Brajajana Ranjana. Yamuna Tira Banachari. Yamuna Tira Banachari. Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari. Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivardhari. Yasodanandana Brajajana Ranjana. Yamuna Tira Banachari. Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari. Jaya Vishnupad Paramahansa Padavachakacharya Stotara Sri Srimad's Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. ISKCON BBD Founder Acharya Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. Jayam Vishnupad Paramahansa Padavachakacharya Stotara Sri Srimad's Divine Grace Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Goswami Maharaj Ki Jai. Ananta Gaudiya Vaishnavrinda Ki Jai. Namacharya Shri Haridas Thakur Ki Jai. Prem Se Kaho Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shri Vasudeva Gaura Bhakta Vrinda Ki Jai. Shri Shri Radha Krishna Go Gopinath Shamakunda Radha Kunda Giri Govardhan Ki Jai. Vrindavan Dham Ki Jai. Navadip Mayapur Dham Ki Jai. Ganga Jamuna Mai Ki Jai. Tulasi Devi Maharani Ki Jai. Samaveda Bhakta Vrinda Ki Jai. Harinam Sankirtana Ki Jai. Brihat Madanga Ki Jai. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories to Sri Sri Guru and Gauranga. All glories to Srila Prabhupada. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. So reading from the Srimad Bhagavatam, 3rd Canto, Chapter 30, text number 6. ātma-jāyā-sutāgāra agāra paśu-draviṇa-bandhuṣu nirūḍha-mūla-hṛdaya ātmānam bahu manyate ātmā-jāyā-sutāgāra paśu-draviṇa-bandhuṣu nirūḍha-mūla-hṛdaya ātmānam bahu manyate ātma-jāyā-sutāgāra paśu-draviṇa-bandhuṣu nirūḍha-mūla-hṛdaya ātmānam bahu manyate ātma-jāyā-sutāgāra paśu-draviṇa-bandhuṣu nirūḍha-mūla-hṛdaya ātmānam bahu manyate. Vaishnavis? Okay. Atma, body. Jaya, wife. Suta, children. Agāra, home. Paśu, animals. Draviṇa, wealth. Bandhuṣu, and friends. Nirūḍha-mūla, deep-rooted. Hṛdaya, his heart. ātmānam, himself. Bahu, highly. Manyate, he thinks. Translation and purport by His Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada. Such satisfaction with one's standard of living is due to deep-rooted attraction for body, wife, home, children, animals, wealth, and friends. In such association, the conditioned soul thinks himself quite perfect. Purport. This so-called perfection of human life is a concoction. Therefore, it is said that the materialist, however materially qualified he may be, is worthless because he is hovering on the mental plane, which will drag him again to the material existence of temporary life. One who acts on the material plane cannot get promotion to the spiritual. Such a person is always sure to glide down again to material life. In the association of so-called society, friendship, and love, the conditioned soul appears completely satisfied. Om Ganatam Anandasya Jananjana Shalakaya Chakshut Unmilitam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha Shri Chaitanya Manobishtam Stapitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupakadamayam Dadati Swapadantikam. So the translation again, such satisfaction of one's standard of living is due to deep-rooted attraction for body, wife, home, children, animals, wealth, and friends. In such association, the conditioned soul thinks himself quite perfect. So of course, this is Lord Kapila Dev speaking. In that last sentence, in such association, the conditioned soul thinks himself quite perfect. And so in his purport, Srila Prabhupada doesn't waste any time dispelling, pointing out that that's an illusion. You know, he immediately says this so-called perfection of human life is a concoction. Actually, before I can go any further, I wanted to officially welcome back Satchidananda Prabhu. Because as soon as you walked in the room, as soon as my eyes kind of caught sight, I felt a big smile appear on my face. I realized it's true. And I felt like the spiritual energy of the whole room kind of went up, so I wanted to take that opportunity to officially welcome him back. Thank you. It's good to see you. So Prabhupada doesn't waste any time to point out that this is an illusion, a concoction. And we've heard that word. I looked up in the dictionary the meaning of concoction. I mean, without doing any research, concoction to me is like you make it up, like a concoction. Like in food, if somebody makes a concoction, it's like they just speculate. They just take this, that, the other thing, thinking, okay, this will work. That's a concoction, And the dictionary definition for the concoction was, hang on. A concoction is a curious mixture of things, like a bunch of liquids stirred in a cup, or an elaborate, unbelievable story you make up to explain something. And then further down, I found in Hinduism, I thought this was interesting, mental concoction, we're kind of more accustomed to hearing that phrase, mental concoction. They said, a preoccupation with materialism that hinders one's spiritual qualifications. So in order to better understand this concept, this is a very short purport, I wanted to read from the Bhagavad Gita, chapter 16, text 23. Krishna makes a statement. He says, this will help us better understand this idea, this concept of concoction, which is actually very similar, I'm going to point out, is very similar to what in English, or what here in the West we refer to as a rationalization. This is a definition for rationalization. The action of attempting to explain or justify behavior or an attitude with logical reasons, even if these are not appropriate. So there's a relationship there, and I'll try to point that out, elaborate upon that. So chapter 16, text 23, Krishna says, Yet shastra vidam utsraja vartate kamakarata nasasidhim abapnoti nasukam na paramgati. So he who disregards scriptural injunctions and acts according to his own whims attains neither perfection nor happiness, nor the supreme destination. In the purport, as described before, the Shastra Vidi, or the direction of the Shastra, is given to the different castes and orders of human society. Everyone is expected to follow these rules and regulations. If one does not follow them and acts whimsically, which Prabhupada defines later on in the purport, what it means to act whimsically, according to his lust, greed, and desire, then he never will be perfect in this life. In other words, a man may theoretically know all these things, but if he does not apply them in his own life, then he is known as the lowest of mankind. In the human form of life, a living entity is expected to be sane and to follow the rules and regulations given for elevating his life to the highest platform. But if he does not follow them, then he degrades himself. But even if he follows the rules and regulations and moral principles and ultimately does not come to the stage of understanding the Supreme Lord, then all his knowledge becomes spoiled. And even if he accepts the existence of God, if he does not engage himself in the service of the Lord, his attempts are spoiled. Therefore, one should gradually raise himself to the platform of Krishna consciousness and devotional service. It is then and there that he can attain the highest perfectional stage, not otherwise. The word kama karata is very significant. A person who knowingly violates the rules acts in lust. He knows that this is forbidden, but still he acts. This is called acting whimsically. So Prabhupada, that's the definition of acting whimsically. He knows that this should be done, but still he does not do it. Therefore he is called whimsical. Such persons are destined to be condemned by the Supreme Lord. Such persons cannot have the perfection which is meant for the human life. The human life is especially meant for purifying one's existence. And one who does not follow the rules and regulations cannot purify himself, nor can he attain the real stage of happiness. So, human beings have duties. They're expected to, know certain things and behave in a certain way. And when they don't do that, this is spoken 5,000 years ago longer, by Lord Kapila Dev. The idea is that you're concocting when you don't follow the Shastra. Shastra is the standard. See? And when you don't follow the Shastra, that's called mental concoction, rationalized. I'll give you an example. Okay, so there's an instruction. Everybody should rise early and come to Mangalarti. Just is off the top of my head. So if you're thinking, well, say that's a Shastric injunction, okay, an instruction from the spiritual master. If somebody's thinking, well, when I get up early like that, I kind of feel tired during the day, and when I'm tired, I tend to overeat, and when I overeat, that I can't talk to people properly, so it's going to ruin my whole day on Sankirtan. So probably better I should just sleep in and just, feel more comfortable. That's called a mental concoction, or rationalizing. See, the standard, the instruction's there in the Shastra. You got to follow that. And when we're deviating from what is in the Shastra, that the standard instruction, we're mentally concocting or rationalizing. And we heard the result of that. So Prabhupada goes on, the next sentence he says, therefore it is said that the materialist, however materially qualified he may be, is worthless because he is hovering on the mental plane. So that's very reminiscent of a verse in the 5th canto of the Srimad Bhagavatam, which most of you probably know by memory, but unfortunately I don't, so I'll read it. Yasyasti bhaktir bhagavati akinchana savar gunas tattara samasate suraha harava bhaktasya kuto mahad guna manor ratan asati davato behi. All the demigods and their exalted qualities, such as religion, knowledge, and renunciation, become manifest in the body of one who has developed unalloyed devotion for the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Vasudeva. On the other hand, a person devoid of devotional service and engaged in material activities has no good qualities, even if he is adept at the practice of mystic yoga or the honest endeavor of maintaining his family and relatives. He must be driven by his own mental speculations and must engage in the service of the Lord's external energy. How can there be any good qualities in such a man? See? So the idea is this, that there's the two energies. There's the internal energy and the external energy. And unless somebody is willing to actually surrender and try to engage fully in devotional service, they're not under the protection of the internal energy. So in the 9th chapter of the Bhagavad Gita, Krishna says, what's the verse after Satatam Kirtiyanto Mam? Mahatmanas tumam parta. Dive here. Mahatmanas tumam parta. Divim prakritim ashrita. Bhajanti ananya manaso gyatva bhutadim avyam. That those who are the great souls, they're divim prakritim ashrita. They're under the protection of the internal potency. In the Nectar Devotion, Prabhupada explains that internal potency is actually Radharani. See, so when you do what like Sravasprabhu read in the morning, it's the same message, just coming in different directions. Mam cha yo vyapichadena bhakti yogena sevate sagunan samatichaitan brahma bhuyaya kalpate. That one has to engage in full devotional service, at least you have to try, and not fall down in any circumstance. Then it once transcends the three modes of material nature and becomes situated on the spiritual platform, or dive in prakritim ashrita. See? So in other words, getting back to today's purport, the materialist, he's not. If you're not surrendering and taking shelter of the instruction of this, practically speaking, the instruction of the spiritual master, who's the external manifestation of the supersoul, who's Krishna's representative here in this material world, if we're not taking shelter of the instruction of the spiritual master, then we're not protected by the internal potency. Then we're going to be controlled by the external energy. And in the 3rd chapter of the Bhagavad Gita, Krishna says, Nahi kaschit shanamapi jatu tishtati akarmakrit karyate hi avasha karma sarva prakriti jagunai. That all men are forced to act helplessly according to the impulses of the three modes of material nature. No one can refrain from doing something, not even for a moment. And in the purport, Prabhupada explains that it's the nature of the soul. It's always active. See? It's always active. So it has to be engaged in the good works of Krishna consciousness. It has to be engaged in devotional service. And he goes on to say that if one is not engaged in the good works of Krishna consciousness, then one will be forced to act according to the dictates of the illusory energy. See, so that's how it works. See, and that's why it's pointed out in that verse I just read from the Bhagavatam that he's considered worthless, because if somebody is not surrendered to Krishna, then they're not protected. If you're not engaged in devotional service, you're not protected by the internal energy, and then it's just a matter of time. People can control their senses. Vishvamitra Muni, he was a Kshatriya, and he actually is, I can't remember exactly the details, but I think he had a thing with what's the other one with a V? Vishishta, Vishishta Muni, and he wanted to become a Brahmin because there's a whole story there with that. And he performed great severe austerities, and he elevated himself to the platform of like a Brahmin and a Muni, and he was, controlling, he was in meditation, and so he was elevated. I mean, but when he heard the tinkling of Menaka's ankle bells, he became distracted, he opened his eyes, and he fell into Maya. You see? So it's just a matter of time. Anybody, if they're not protected by the internal potency, sooner or later, they're going to go for engage in the material activities again. See? The only way to become free, you can stop, at least for a time being, from material activity, but the only way to get rid of the material desire is you got to get the mercy of Krishna. That desire doesn't go any other way. I'm not going to scramble around to try to find it, but there's a verse in the 4th chapter, the Srimad Bhagavatam, Yat Pada Pankaj Valasya Pala. It talks about how the karmis, the gyanis, the yogis, they all try to become free from this deep-rooted desire for material enjoyment, but they're unsuccessful. Even in the Bhagavad Gita, chapter 2, text 59, Krishna says, Vishaya Vidivartante Nihahadasya Dehina Rasavarjam Asopyasya Padam Drishtra Navartate. So he points out that, let me just find it real quick, translation, so I get it exact. Though the embodied soul may be restricted from sense enjoyment, the taste for sense objects remains. But ceasing such engagements, by experiencing a higher taste, he is fixed in consciousness. In other words, you could restrict yourself from the activity, but the desire is going to stay there. It's only when somebody engages fully in devotional service and becomes purified that both you're free from the activity and you're free from the desire. Both. It's the only thing that does it, devotional service. Severe austerities won't do it, just kind of like gritting your teeth, and none of those things work. I'm pretty sure there's something in the 6th canto where it talks about how if you have a field and you burn out the field, to get rid of all the weeds and everything, but then unless you uproot, you got to uproot each kind of plant. If you don't uproot it, then, the rain comes, and despite the fact that you cleared that whole field, you raised it to the ground, nice and clean, the rain comes and shoop. We actually see this. You kind of see an example of this every, few times a year right here in Los Angeles, if you look at the hills, which if you bother to. When it doesn't rain for a while, it kind of gets real dry, and then just everything goes to like, gray, brown like that. And you think, oh, this is like a desert, right? But as soon as it rains, there it is again. Everything's all green and lush, and it's like a whole, because the seeds are there. They're still in the ground. See, so that's it's an analogy. I'm pretty sure that analogy appears in the 6th canto of the Bhagavatam. The only thing that uproots those bijas, the seeds of material desire, is devotional service. See, so reading on. So Prabhupada says he's worthless because he's hovering on the mental plane. He's not a devotee. He's not protected by the internal potency, which will drag him again to material existence of temporary life. He's already in material life, and by saying here, Prabhupada is saying, drag him again to material existence of temporary life, he'll even go lower. You go down, because if you're not engaged in devotional service, very risky business. It's very risky business now in the Kali Yuga, okay? I'll explain why. Say you live in India. We'll say, this is hypothetical. Somebody is in India, and they're, come a very traditional family. they're worshiping something, and they're following the regulative principles. They don't have illicit sex. They're not engaging in intoxication, meat eating, gambling, like that. Okay, so they're going about their life. They're not devotees, though. So they're going to get some, they're contacting the modes of material nature. We contact the material modes of nature not by say people are assembled and they're drinking and smoking and you just happen to go stand by them. You're not contacting the mode of material nature necessarily. You contact the material nature by how you use or misuse your free will. You see, the Shastra conjunctions are there. And according to how you use or misuse your free will, you're contacting the modes of material nature. As soon as you, as soon as you don't, are whimsical and you don't want to follow the Shastra conjunction, then immediately you're contacting a mode of material nature. What mode? That depends on exactly how you choose to, misuse your free will beyond that point. But right, so getting back to the hypothetical example, somebody's in India. No, they're following the regulative principles, but they're not engaged in devotional service. They're contacting the modes of material nature, because unless you're engaged in devotional service, you're going to be associating with the modes of material nature. So, but they might wind up, because they're pious. They're not engaging in such sinful activity. So the result of that might be, okay, they'll take birth as a human being again, maybe in India again, and get to continue that sort of life, perhaps. But here in the West, no way. Here in the West, I'm talking for average person out there, illicit sex, meat eating, intoxication, gambling are regular daily affairs. They're regular daily affairs. I mean, definitely meat eating, maybe not illicit sex and intoxication. That's a weekly affair. But, eating meat, that's a regular daily affair. So the point is that they'll be dragged down again to material existence because it's it's surcharged. That's the whole way of life here. You see? So if somebody's not engaged in devotional service here in the West, in America, and they're just a regular old person out there, then on a regular daily basis, they're probably eating meat. They're breaking that regulative principle. On a regular weekly basis, they're having illicit sex and taking intoxication, probably gambling as well, stock market, this, that. And so the result of that is they're going down. I mean, my understanding of the philosophy is it seems to me very unlikely that they'll get another human body again. I would think, based upon what I've heard, they'd be very, very lucky to get another human body again. So Prabhupada goes on to say, one who acts on the mental plane cannot get promotion to the spiritual world. No way. You gotta, you gotta surrender. You gotta take shelter of the instructions of the spiritual master and engage in devotional service. Such a person is always sure to glide down to material life. It's interesting that Prabhupada uses that word glide. This is not my original thought. I picked this up from Devamrita Swami when he was here a year or two ago. He picked up on that word. Because gliding is very pleasant. I'm going to read the dictionary definition of gliding here. Oh, I got it written down, sorry. Gliding, moving with a smooth, continuous motion, typically with little noise. It's pleasant, gliding. Do you remember gliding when you were a kid? Even if when you see something gliding, like a balsa wood paper plane, it just glides through the air. Or I remember that I used to have this thing, slip and slide. It was like a plastic thing. You put some water on it, and then you just you run, and then you jump on it, and you just go, feel like a really long distance, and it was so much fun, No effort, you're just gliding along. See, so gliding, Prabhupada uses this word, such a person is sure to glide. They think they're having a good time. That's the nature of the illusory energy, and it ties in with, that word ties in perfectly with what we heard in the previous translations. It said the conditioned soul is satisfied in his own particular species of life. While deluded by the covering influence of the illusory energy, he feels little inclination to cast off that body, even when in hell, for he takes delight in hellish enjoyment. See? So it's such a powerful illusion that not only are you going down, but you're enjoying it in the meantime. You really think this is cool. See? So it's gliding down to material life. In the association of so-called society, friendship, and love, the conditioned soul appears completely satisfied. So we have to be on guard. You have to be on guard, because we have to be very conscientious to try to follow the instructions of the spiritual master, because when you deviate, what happens is, it's not like all of a sudden you just start suffering like, I better start following it. No, you think you're good. I'm good. I'm not coming to the program, but or I'm not chanting my rounds anymore, or I'm not following the regular principles, but hey, I'm okay. I'm doing fine. I feel really fine, gliding down. It's part of the illusion. What was it we heard you say? Avanaratmika, Prapchik and Avanaratmika, the two potencies a couple days ago, the throwing and the covering. It's just, Maya's very good at what she does. She's going to actually get you to think that you're having a good time. So very important not to deviate in the first place. Okay, so just to wrap it up, so a safeguard against falling into this illusion is the chanting is very important. The chanting is very important. I made this point in the last class I gave. I'll just quickly reiterate it, that we've been given a great concession. 16 rounds is, like Prabhupada said, as I read to you last week, it's nothing. He was talking in Vrindavan, he was giving these nectar devotion classes back around 1972, and he was saying, 16 rounds, that's nothing. In Vrindavan, they're chanting 64 rounds, 128 rounds, like that. And then, he was saying how you have to increase, He gave that as, there was that one devotee, god brother of mine, he asked him, Prabhupada, what happens if there's a grihasta couple, and one of them wants to be, follow, and the other doesn't? Should they separate? And Prabhupada said, no, they shouldn't separate. They should be trained how to engage in devotional service, properly. Sense enjoyment is a sign you're not making advancements. And he quoted that verse from the 11th canto, and he's saying, detachment is supposed to be there. That's the test. And he repeated that 4 times. That is the test. That is the test. This should be the test. 4 times in like 3 sentences. So, but then the devotee said, but Prabhupada, he said the fever should decrease. And then the devotee asked, Prabhupada, what if the fever isn't decreasing? Then Prabhupada said, then instead of 16 rounds, one should try to chant 64 rounds. He said, Haridas Thakur, he was 300,000, not rounds, but names. He said, you have to increase. That is the only remedy. That was Prabhupada's words. You have to increase. That is the only remedy. So that's the remedy. In that particular instance, it was obviously probably they were having trouble following the regulative principle. But in general, by increasing our sadhana, we get out of the bodily concept of life. You see, it's not just that was Prabhupada's instruction for that, I don't think, for that particular situation. In general, if we chant more attentively, and we chant more and more attentively, both things, right, then the result is, it's supposed to be, we get out of the bodily concept of life. We start going up to the spiritual platform. That's the solution to all the problems. Now, I just wanted to read you something here. This is from... let's see, where do I got it? Oh, yeah. Difference. Okay. This is Bhaktivinoda Thakur, and this is from Sajjana Toshini. He goes here. Let's make sure I start to read the right thing. Okay, here it is. You might find this kind of unbelievable. This is Bhaktivinoda Thakur. It says, when one's mind desires to chant and remember 100,000 holy names, that's 64 rounds daily, and further desires to slowly increase it to 300,000, which is what Haridas Thakur was chanting every day, when one's mind becomes very attached and eager to complete the fixed number of rounds daily and pushes one to complete the Sankhya every day, then it is understood that very soon the laziness or apathy in chanting the Hare Krishna Mahamantra will vanish by the mercy of the devotees, and one's chanting will bring one the desired fruit of pure love of Krishna. So why I'm reading this is kind of, I was always thinking, well, 64, that's kind of like the ideal, But, it's Bhaktivinoda Thakur and Bhakti Siddhanta, they were chanting big, previous acharyas. Just be honest with you, Prabhupada came and he gave 16. But prior to that, Bhakti Siddhanta, he had that vow where he was going to chant 1 billion names, right? And he sat down in Mayapur for 10 years. Gorkashore Das Babaji was chanting like a lot. Bhaktivinoda Thakur, we hear his statement. Towards the end of his life, he was kind of trying to get up there to 192 rounds. So in other words, the chanting is a really big deal. It's really important. This is a letter that Prabhupada wrote. This is an excerpt from a letter. I got it. Must have deleted it. But Prabhupada in this letter was saying how Lord Chaitanya and Haridas Thakur, practically all day long, they were just absorbed in the chanting of the Hare Krishna mantra. So, Haridas Thakur, it's kind of documented, he was chanting 200,000 names, which is actually 174 rounds, but somehow they say 192. But and Lord Chaitanya was also all day long, chanting, kirtan, chanting, like that. That was their program. That was their engagement. So that's. Oh yeah, one last point. That used to be the culture. Even in ISKCON, it was the culture. Not chanting 64 rounds. I don't remember ever that being the culture. Okay, but I remember when I joined, 1973, which actually was 52 years ago tomorrow. Okay. The devotees walked around with their hands in the bead bag. That was quite common. I joined in Brooklyn, Henry Street, 1973. It was quite common to see devotees. This is after japa time. All day long, devotees would wear a bead bag. It wasn't just like an ornament, It was something you used. That you see them with the bead bag, I'm talking not about just the big shots, not like say Jayadvaita Maharaj or Bali Mardan or the temple president, all the devotees, like rank, from the top to the bottom, all hand in the bead bag, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, all day long. You saw devotees chanting. It wasn't just during the japa period. It was devotees wore a bead bag and they had their hand and they were using it. It was quite common to see that. So that culture is somehow or another. We used to chant Hare Krishna in between bites of prasadam. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna. Devotees were into chanting, but that culture is somehow or another has kind of disappeared. But that was, that was good. That was good. That was, really something. And devotees did chant more rounds, nothing like 64, but they would chant 25. Maybe if somebody chanted 32, that was like, wow, But the idea was there to chant more. And that was what, was protecting everybody. So, yeah, that's basically. Oh, well, I'll just read one last thing here. I could easily find it. Yeah, this is a description of the perfectional stage. Sometimes we forget what we lose sight of what it is we're striving to ultimately achieve. Well, here's a description. This is Lord Chaitanya speaking, and he's speaking, but he's saying what he learned from his spiritual master. So it says here, he's talking to Prakashananda Saraswati. He says, "It is the characteristic of love of Godhead that by nature it induces transcendental symptoms in one's body and makes one more and more greedy to achieve the shelter of the lotus feet of the Lord. When one actually develops love of Godhead, he naturally sometimes cries, sometimes laughs, sometimes chants, and sometimes runs here and there, just like a madman." Prabhupada says, it shouldn't be artificial. He does in the purport there. And it goes on. Perspiration, trembling, standing on end of one's bodily hairs, tears, faltering voice, fading complexion, madness, melancholy, patience, pride, joy, and humility. These are the various natural symptoms of ecstatic love of Godhead, which causes a devotee to dance and float in an ocean of transcendental bliss while chanting the Hare Krishna mantra. See? So in other words, we got so much to it's so much to gain if we try to do this whole thing seriously and properly, and so much to lose if we don't. So it's kind of like high stakes, but anyway, we should be conscious of that. So I'll stop there. Anybody have any question or comment? Okay, thank you very much. Grantaraj Srimad Bhagavatam ki jai, Srila Prabhupada ki jai. Mm-hmm. I'll put it on.